3D platformers are probably one of my favourite genres of video game. A Hat in Time has provided me with hours of glitchy entertainment, and Mario Odyssey has made me desperate for a Switch, even though I can't really afford one right now. Oh well, I suppose playing Mario Galaxy with one hand on a controller and the other on a mouse will have to do for the moment. Recently I decided to really dig deep and try to figure out what it is that makes these games fun. So this is a video about the tenets of what I like to call the joy of movement. The platformer genre is probably the one responsible for this concept's conception, as Mario Bros. For the NES would give birth to a myriad of copycat video games. From a personal perspective, Mario is easily the single most important video game in history, as it would lay down the first two ground rules of the joy of movement, and would also turn the platformer genre from something that kinda existed into something that was the go-to genre for everyone at the time. Just look at LJN. That all said, not every platformer was fun to move around in. In fact, sometimes it sucked. So what set Mario apart? Well, let's take a look at the mechanics at Mario's disposal. To begin with, Mario can move, but hang on. When I release a button, he takes a while to slow down. Pushing the button in the opposite direction causes him to slow down faster. He can also sprint, which is a lot of fun, but it's really risky. He can jump, but he has less control in the air. He can also bounce off enemies. Now that's fun. I could do this all day. Okay, so we have some basic mechanics now, but we're not really sure what the principles behind those are that make things fun. So maybe we should look at some other games which contain enjoyable movement. Sonic's a good example. It was a game centered entirely around the concept of speed and momentum, and it definitely builds upon the ideas that Mario established. Speed is seen by the game as both a challenge and a reward, as your ultimate goal is to get to the end of a level as quickly as possible, but there's a few other things about Sonic that are really important. All Sonic's attacks are weaved into the movement system. Essentially, combat is built around movement, not the other way around. This was the case to some extent in Mario, but it wasn't fully realized until Sonic. Okay, I'm gonna spend a moment talking about Quake for a second here. In Quake, there's a glitch called bunny hopping, where you can gain speed by staying in the air as much as possible and by strafing in midair. Atop this, the game also let you rocket jump, launching you high into the air at a high speed. These glitches help to explain another one of those principles, which is the principle of air movement. Essentially, being in the air is more difficult, but it's also a lot of fun to work with. So let's go back to talking about speed for a second. Thus far, all the games we've looked at have shown that going fast is fun but challenging, and all of them have contained a momentum system. The thing is though, a momentum system is not necessary for this principle to take effect. If you look at games like the Jak Trilogy or the Crash Bandicoot series, those games still capitalize on the joy of movement, but momentum is either non-existent or extremely minimal in those games. But those titles do still make going fast an enjoyable challenge. In Crash Bandicoot 2 and beyond, the fastest way to move around is by slide jumping. Similarly, in the Jak and Daxter trilogy, you can move by rapidly roll jumping, air slamming, and spin jumping. All these moves let you go faster, but are risky to pull off. Similarly, in The End Is Nigh, momentum does play a large factor in the gameplay, and there's no sprint button. But you can use things like fast falling and short hopping to move more rapidly through the game. Essentially, these games all understand that fast movement is both its own challenge and its own reward. This is the first principle of the joy of movement, and to capitalize on it, a game should always give the player tools to move more rapidly, but with some risk attached. The second principle is instead related to airborne movement. In all the games I mentioned, you can notice the trend that the same risk-reward balance attached to speed is present in air movement. However, there's something else that's a lot more important. When playing a good platformer, a big part of the challenge is to almost fly. A good player looks as though they don't even need the platforms and have perfect in-air control, even though controlling a character in the air is extremely difficult. The player needs to return to the ground every now and then. More or less, the player is provided the tools to defy gravity, and the skilled player can almost do this. Basically, being airborne is fun, and while it should be harder to control the character when they are airborne, they should still be controllable. Equally, there should be a challenge to staying airborne, as doing so is its own reward. Last but not least is the most important but least used or understood principle. Combat must be built around movement, not the other way around. If you look at Crash Bandicoot or Jak and Daxter, all of the player characters' abilities involve movement in some way, shape, or form. In Crash Bandicoot, spinning doesn't slow you down and can help you glide after a jump. Atop this, you can slide, which offers a brief speed boost. Jumping can kill opponents if you jump off an opponent's head. In Jak and Daxter, punching carries your character forwards briefly. Spinning gives you added height to your jump, and even your guns can benefit from combining their use with movement-based abilities. This same principle is at play in early Sonic games, and it is single-handedly responsible for the series' success. More importantly, however, this principle influences the game's level design. In Sonic, the game doesn't ask you to stop in order to deal with enemies, rather it lets you go faster by rolling. In Crash Bandicoot, you mainly use enemies to keep moving through the level, jumping off the top of them to clear gaps. In Jak and Daxter, you deal with opponents as you progress, moving towards opponents to take them out. One of the key things that made Breath of the Wild a great game is how it engages with the joy of movement. Unlike in Skyrim where movement is clunky and boring, Breath of the Wild recognizes that movement is what you're doing most of the game, and it does its best to make it fun. While descending, you have the option to move much faster by shield sliding, which suddenly turns your attacks into kickflips, and lets you take jumps by going off rocks as you descend. On the topic of kickflips, skateboarding games forego combat entirely and focus on the first two principles. Going fast is a prerequisite in these titles, as you can only complete tricks if you have some amount of speed. And atop this, doing tricks, which is your ultimate objective, requires you to be airborne, which in turn is difficult, requiring speed for you to engage with the correct terrain. The new Doom is equal parts platformer and shooter. As you jump around like crazy and move insanely fast, you're begged to try moving from enemy to enemy, lunging forwards and tearing them apart. Even Dark Souls really wishes it was a platformer and wants to play with the big boys with some joyous movement, but it can't. All this being said, I'm glad we're seeing platformers return, as they're entirely built around the joy of movement, and they can experiment why these principles and mechanics are fun, so that we can learn a lot more about the joy of movement.